Hello Madcappers! Today we're going to have some fun making a retro 4-point fleece beanie toque. It's the hottest selling hat right now on Etsy, so it's going to be one of those hats that you're going to want to make for everybody on your Christmas list this year. You can make it in adult sizes, you can make it in kid sizes. It's a really easy hat to make. It's actually one of the very first hats that I made when we started working with fleece in the early 90s. So I'm happy to show you how I make this hat, and it's just a simple one piece of fabric. I'm using the red and black buffalo check. I've measured the circumference of my head, and for me I'm 22.5 inches or 57.5 centimeters in circumference, which is average, and I'm adding an extra inch or 2.5 centimeters to that width on the stretchy side of the fabric, and that's the part that's going to go around my head. I've made some matching fingerless gloves to go with it, and you can see that pattern as well in the video on our YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description below. So I'm just going to match up my print right sides together, and I'm going to give it a nice one long seam down the back, and the length of my hat is an extra inch to the circumference measurement. So for me, this piece of fabric is 23.5 inches or 60 centimeters going around my head, and then it's 24.5 inches long or 62.5 centimeters in length, and that's the back seam that goes up and down from the top of the hat to the bottom of the cuff. So you have a slightly longer hat than you do the width going around your head. So that's why we'll say the longer seam is the back seam. And I'm just going to move over to the sewing machine now, and I'll use my regular seam width to sew that seam closed. So I'm sewing those two edges together to make a tube, a one long tube, and I'm using my 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter wide seam width, and I'm going to go all the way down the length of that hat. And I used my pins to make sure that my pattern was going to match up, and I like to use my pins like little basting stitches. And I'm just going to flatten it out a little bit so that when I do this next step, which I'm just going to fold it over on top of itself, matching up that back seam. Those two top edges now are together, and that will be the top of our hat. And then there's another edge that on each side that's a folded edge, and that would be the center front of our hat. So we're just going to cut a notch there, and that tells us where the center front point is. And now we're just going to sew back on top of that back seam, but it's folded in half now, so it's not going to be quite as long. It's half the length that it was before, but instead of 2 layers, there's now 4 layers that we're sewing through. And once again, we'll use our regular seam width of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter, slightly wider just to catch the seam that we did first. So it'll be buried inside the hat and not visible from the outside. And now we have an open top edge and an edge that has 4 layers. And now we're just going to turn it right side out, and here's the trick. I just take 1 layer and the other 3 are on the left-hand side, and I pull it through and just straighten it up at the top and move that layer that's on the 3rd layer closest to the inside of the hat over to join that first layer. And now my seam is hidden, and I have 2 layers going all the way around. And I'll just match up those notches that I made. But my back seam is firmly in place. It's sewn down nicely, so that means when I turn up a cuff, when this hat is finished, that cuff is going to look nice and sharp as well. So just matching up the notch on the center front. Straightening it all up. And just sort of watching to see where that pattern is as well. And I'm going to just close that now, go all the way around with a seam close to the edge. So about a 1/4 of an inch or 6mm. And once again, my handy dandy magnetic seam guide is working hard to help me with this task. So now that I've got that edge closed, I still have a tube, and I'm just going to match up the back seam with that center front notch. And now I have 2 side edges. And what I need to do is create 4 sections that are about the same, and this is a really fast and easy way to do that. So I've just cut a couple more notches. So I have 2 notches on the side, a notch on the front, and a back seam. So starting with the back seam closest to me, I'm just going to bring that first notch to the left of the back seam into where the back seam is and just pin them in place. So I have created a panel there, and now I'm going to pick it up again, and I'm going to fold so that that next notch matches up with that first notch, and I'll pin it in place. And I think you can see where I'm going here. And again, rinse and repeat. We're just going to match the notches. So bring that next notch on your left side in to meet the notch that's closest to you, and you can pin or clip in place. And by the time you work your way around, you should be back at the beginning with 4 definite panels, folded panels. And we're going to move over to our sewing machine and sew that top edge of each panel closed so that our panels become 4 points. And I think, again, you know where we're going with this. So we're going to sew that folded edge of each of the 4 panels from the edge into the center of the top of the hat. And here we are, back at the sewing machine, ready to do just that. So again, I'm using my seam width of about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. And I'm going to sew from the outside edge of each panel in towards the center of the hat without sewing over top of the neighboring panels. So get as close as you can. You're not going to really see any sort of an opening if you get as close as you can. You don't want a big gap though, so try and get as close as you can to the center point. Now back in the day, when we made this hat, we used to put a little pom-pom in the center to cover up any little hole or any little gap that was there. So that's an idea, especially if you're making this for a little girl. It's super cute. And I probably will do a second video about this again in the fall when the weather turns a little bit colder and nastier here in Canada, but we're in springtime mode now here at Madcap. But I can thank my subscriber Bobby for asking me this morning if I had a pattern for this hat. And I thought, oh boy, yes, I do. I know how to make this hat. And in my glee to make the hat, I didn't even take off my fingerless gloves. Which just goes to show you how handy those gloves are. You can still do anything you want with them on, including sewing. So now I have all 4 of those pieces closed at the top, with all my seams ending as close as I can get to the middle, and I'm ready to turn it right side out. So going point by point, pushing that point out towards the outside of the hat. Our 4-point fleece beanie is starting to take shape. And the magic of this hat is once you put it on your head sort of helps make those points pop up, which is really fun. And I'm just going to turn up the bottom now to create a cuff. And there you have it, folks. Voila! Our retro 4-point fleece beanie cap. And just a little bit of a Madcap label on the front. And it's done. Well, if you liked the video, hopefully you will give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're just getting started to share with you 36 years of our original hat designs. And thank you to everyone for supporting our channel. We love you all. We can't wait to get started on our next hat project. Thank you so much for watching. Happy sewing, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Bye.